They say the most painful stories are the ones you never expected to live through yourself. The ones that begin on a night that looks harmless, elegant, even beautiful until a single moment twists your entire world into something unrecognizable. And if you're listening to me right now, you might find pieces of yourself buried in the words I'm about to say. Because this isn't just a story about betrayal or revenge. It's a story about every silent sacrifice, every humiliation, every time you're told you're not enough, every moment you swallow tears behind a practiced smile, convincing yourself that love is supposed to hurt. But let me warn you before I begin. Once you start hearing this story, you won't be able to stop. Because what happened to me could happen to anyone, your sister, your friend, or maybe even you. My name is Claire Dawson, and until that night, I thought I had finally secured the kind of life I'd always dreamed about, married into wealth. Living in a mansion with glittering marble floors, a husband whose expensive suits made him look like the kind of man who should never be questioned, and a mother-in-law who carried herself like she owned the air everyone breathed. But what no one tells you is that luxury doesn't protect you from cruelty. If anything, it sometimes amplifies it. I used to believe that I had married into love, that Ethan Dawson actually cared for me beyond the way I looked on his arm at corporate dinners. And maybe in the beginning he did, or maybe I was just blinded by the fairy tale. But whatever the truth was, it shattered piece by piece over months of cold shoulders, subtle insults, and the kind of silence that suffocates a home built from gold. The real story began on a night I can never forget, a charity gala hosted by Dawson Enterprises. A night filled with the soft glow of candles, the clinking of crystal champagne glasses, and the quiet murmurs of the wealthy pretending to care about causes they hardly remembered the next morning. I remember standing in front of the mirror earlier that evening, smoothing the front of my white gown, reminding myself to look perfect, smile perfect, be perfect, because that's what Ethan demanded from me, even without saying a word. And I tried. God, I tried. But deep down, I sensed something was wrong. The way he avoided my eyes, the way he answered my questions with one-word replies, the way he left the house that morning like he was escaping a burning building instead of kissing his wife goodbye. Still, nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. As I entered the grand ballroom that evening, heads turned instinctively, not because of me, but because the Dawson family demanded attention wherever they went. I spotted Ethan near the main table, surrounded by executives, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in months, and something in my chest tightened, not out of jealousy, but out of this strange certainty that I wasn't part of that laughter anymore. And then I saw her, Margaret Dawson, my mother-in-law, dressed in shimmering gold that almost made her glow under the chandelier lights. She had always been graceful, polished, intimidating in a way that made you feel like a child standing before a queen. From the day I married Ethan, she treated me like an accessory to her son, not a partner. I was too simple, too soft, too emotional, too normal. Not Dawson material. Yet that night she approached me with a smile so sweet it soured my stomach. She held an envelope between her perfectly manicured fingers, and with a voice dripping with false warmth, she said, "Claire, dear, I have something for you." For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was offering an olive branch. But inside that envelope wasn't anything close to kindness. It was divorce papers, signed, finalized, neatly prepared, as if my heart had been a business transaction plotted weeks in advance. I looked up at her, my breath trapped somewhere between my ribs and my throat. Ethan hadn't even had the decency to speak to me first. He hadn't warned me, hadn't asked for closure, hadn't even argued. He had just signed away our marriage like it was another contract on his desk. Margaret leaned in slightly, her perfume expensive and suffocating, and whispered, "It's best for everyone, dear. You never quite fit here, round us." The wealthy smiled and chatted, completely unaware that my world was collapsing silently. Or maybe they knew. Maybe they had been waiting for this moment, like spectators at a theater performance. My fingers trembled as I stared at the papers, the elegant Dawson Enterprises seal mocking me at the top of the document. I felt humiliated, exposed, small. I should have cried right there, or screamed, or run but. Something inside me hardened instead. Something that had been waiting for a moment like this. Because what Margaret didn't know, what Ethan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had a secret. A very powerful one. One that would flip their entire world upside down. One that would make them regret every word, every insult, every cold glance they had ever thrown my way. But before I reveal that, you need to understand how I ended up there, standing in a room full of people who believed they had already won. Because stories like this don't begin with revenge. They begin with trust. They begin with love. Or what you thought was love. I met Ethan 4 years earlier on a rainy afternoon in New York City. I was running late for an interview, clutching a cheap umbrella that flipped backward in the wind, leaving me drenched and hopeless. He was standing under the awning of a cafe, dry, polished, handsome, in a tailored charcoal suit. When he saw my umbrella betray me, he laughed lightly, not mockingly, but in a way that made the rain feel less cruel. He offered me his umbrella, walked me into the cafe, insisted on buying me a drink, and listened as I rambled nervously about my job interview. At the time, I didn't know he was the heir to a billion-dollar empire. He didn't mention it. He didn't need to. The simplicity of that moment felt pure. And for a long time, I held on to the memory of the man who shielded me from the rain. If only I'd known that love built on illusions eventually cracks. Ethan and I fell quickly. Dinners turned into weekends. Weekends into declarations of love. He introduced me to his world slowly, testing how well I adapted to wealth. I tried my best. Fancy dinners, charity events, corporate galas. It was overwhelming, but I believed I could learn. I believed I belonged because he made me feel like I did. Until Margaret stepped in. The first time she looked at me, I could tell she was measuring everything: my clothes, my posture, my background, my silence. She didn't ask me about my job, my family, my dreams. She asked me if I liked classical music, if I knew the difference between vintages of wine, if I understood stock market fundamentals. And every time I hesitated, she smiled like she had just confirmed something she suspected all along. Yet Ethan insisted she would warm up to me. "She's just protective," he said. "She'll love you eventually." She didn't. Not for a single day. But Ethan married me anyway. And at first, she tolerated my presence the way someone tolerates a stain on their favorite tablecloth. It didn't take long before Ethan began to echo her opinions. "Maybe wear something more formal," he'd say. "Maybe speak less during business dinners. Maybe stay home this time." I convinced myself it was normal, that every marriage had compromises, that he loved me. But love doesn't shrink you. It doesn't mold you into something unrecognizable. It doesn't erase who you are. Which brings me back to that night, the night they thought they had destroyed me. As I held the divorce papers, something inside me stopped trembling. I lifted my chin and met Margaret's eyes, and for the first time she faltered, because she wasn't used to seeing strength in me, and she certainly wasn't expecting what I said next. "Thank you," I whispered. She blinked, confused, irritated, and then I smiled, not out of joy, but out of the quiet. Dangerous power of knowing a truth she didn't. "Really," I continued softly, "thank you for the divorce." Round us, a few heads turned. Ethan finally noticed me and walked over with the detached confidence of a man who thinks he's untouchable. "Claire," he said stiffly, "let's not make a scene." "A scene," I repeated. "No, Ethan, I'm not the one who made a scene." I held up the papers between two fingers and added, "But you're right. This does make things easier." "Easier?" Margaret snapped. "What on earth do you mean?" And that was the moment before the entire room watched their world shift. The moment I revealed the secret I had kept hidden for months. The moment they realized they had underestimated me in the most catastrophic way possible. Because while they had spent years believing I was powerless, dependent, insignificant, I had quietly become the one person they should have feared the most. And Margaret Dawson, standing there in her glittering gold gown, had no idea that the woman she just tried to discard now owned everything they had. For a moment, time in that glittering ballroom seemed to freeze. as if the chandeliers themselves stopped glowing just to hear what would come out of my mouth next. And Margaret's confident posture shifted the slightest bit, her perfectly shaped eyebrows drawing together like she had suddenly realized she'd miscalculated something crucial. Ethan, standing beside her, looked irritated more than anything, like my calmness was inconveniencing him, like my lack of tears somehow insulted the performance he had rehearsed in his mind. And I took a slow breath, steady and deliberate, because what I was about to say would not just shatter their assumptions, it would change the entire structure of their empire. "What do you mean easier?" Margaret demanded again, her voice dropping into that sharp, cold tone she used on employees she wanted fired. The room had grown silent now. The guests who pretended to be absorbed in their wine glasses or conversations were all watching. Sensing the storm building between the three of us, I let my fingers loosen their grip on the divorce papers, letting them hang lightly in my hand as if they were no more significant than a grocery list. And then I said the words I had rehearsed in my mind for months. "It means," I whispered, leaning forward just slightly, "that everything you think you own, your businesses, your properties, your accounts, your shares, none of it belongs to you anymore." Ethan scoffed. Margaret frowned. Confusion rippled across their faces before dissolving into amusement, as though they believed I had finally lost my mind. "Claire," Ethan said with a condescending smirk, "please don't embarrass yourself. You don't even understand how the company structure works." "You're right," I replied calmly. "I didn't understand at first, but I learned." His smirk faded, replaced with a flicker of uncertainty. Margaret's eyes narrowed. I felt the shift in the room, the collective inhale of people realizing that something was terribly, deliciously wrong. "I spent the last year studying everything," I continued softly. "Your trust funds, your corporate filings, your private holdings, even your legal vulnerabilities." Ethan snapped. "Claire, this isn't funny." "Oh, I'm not trying to be funny," I said, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that startled him. "I'm trying to explain how badly you miscalculated." Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice but not her arrogance. "Enough games, Claire. You are no one. You own nothing." I smiled. "On the contrary, I own everything." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered. Ethan's face drained of color. Margaret's lips parted slightly, like she had been struck across the face. But I wasn't done. "Do you remember," I asked, turning to Ethan, "when you convinced me to sign all those documents last year? The ones you said were routine spousal acknowledgments." Ethan stiffened. "Claire, the ones you didn't bother to read to me because you assumed I was too naive to ask?" Margaret looked sharply at him. "What documents?" "The ones," I said, raising my voice just enough to be heard by every wealthy spectator in that grand ballroom, "that transferred controlling interest of Dawson Enterprises to me upon marital dissolution." The silence that followed was electric. And then the impact hit. Ethan's eyes widened. Margaret's face twisted into disbelief. "That's impossible," she hissed. "No board would approve that." "You're right," I replied. No board did. Because there wasn't a board when Ethan did it. He did it alone. Ethan stepped forward. "Claire, listen." "No," I said firmly. "You listen." And the truth began to spill out like water bursting from a dam. Months earlier, Ethan had been facing a massive legal threat. Dawson Enterprises had been under quiet investigation for fraudulent tax structures illegal. Ones Margaret had designed years before but buried cleverly. Ethan panicked. He needed to shield assets. He needed someone clean. Someone the government wouldn't suspect. Someone who looked harmless. Someone like me. And so, in his desperation, he had transferred controlling interest to me temporarily, believing I wouldn't understand the legal power it gave me, trusting that he could reclaim everything later. But he had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me. "Ethan thought I wouldn't read the documents," I said softly. "He thought I wouldn't educate myself. He thought I'd just sign anything he handed me because that's what he and you." I glanced at Margaret, believed I was quiet, obedient, stupid. Ethan clenched his jaw. That's not what happened, really? I asked, lifting an eyebrow. Then tell your mother the truth. Tell her why you rushed the transfer. Tell her why you begged me to sign without telling me what it meant. Margaret's head snapped toward her son. You did what? Ethan swallowed hard. Mother, I had no choice. You gave her control of our company, she screeched. You handed OUR empire to this. This, careful, I murmured. I own this empire now. Might want to show some respect. Gasps rippled again. The ballroom buzzed with shock and exhilaration because the wealthy love drama, as long as they're not the ones bleeding. Margaret looked at me like I had become a ghost she never believed in. Ethan tried to regain control. Claire, listen to me. We can fix this. Just tear up the papers, come home, and I laughed. A soft, deadly laugh that echoed louder than any scream could. Come home. Ethan, you served me divorce papers at a public event, and now you want me to save you. His voice cracked. Claire, please. And suddenly the audience could see the shift in power. The once confident heir now looked like a desperate man trying to stop the inevitable. Do you want to know what I did when I discovered what you signed? I asked him. I hired the best legal team in the country, quietly, carefully, and do you know what they told me? Margaret crossed her arms tightly, her golden gown shimmering like armor, dented by truth. They told me, I continued, that as long as the marriage ends in clearly, it has I become the permanent controlling shareholder. Margaret's voice sharpened. You planned this. I shook my head. No, you planned to humiliate me. You planned to throw me away. I simply decided not to let you succeed. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, panic settling over him. Claire, listen. I only signed those documents because I trusted you. No, I interrupted. You signed them because you thought I wasn't a threat. Because you thought I would always remain small. The truth hit him like a blow to the chest. Margaret spoke again, voice trembling with rage. You won't get away with this. I will challenge this in court. Go ahead, I replied calmly. But the paper trail is immaculate. Ethan signed willingly. Your company lawyer notarized everything. And every shred of your illegal financial activity is documented and secured. Margaret's face paled. What illegal activity? I tilted my head. Interesting that you assume, you, she froze. Ethan looked between us in horror. Claire, he whispered, what did you do? What I had to do, I said with chilling composure. I protected myself. Suddenly, Margaret lunged forward, gripping the edge of the table so tightly that the veins in her hands bulged. You think you can come into my family, live off my wealth, and then steal everything? I didn't steal anything, I corrected. You gave it to me. She opened her mouth, but I held up a finger. And you know what the best part is? Her eyes blazed. What? I don't even need the divorce to go through for me to keep control. But now that you've initiated it publicly, it only strengthens my case. Margaret stumbled back like she'd been slapped. Ethan pressed a shaking hand to his mouth. The crowd murmured louder now. Admiration, fear, awe. And I wasn't done. Not yet. Do you remember, I said slowly, the scholarship program your company pretended to support? The one you used to divert funds? Margaret's eyes widened in horror. How do you... I know everything. The room fell silent again. Ethan gaped at me like he didn't recognize the woman standing before him. And maybe he didn't. Because I wasn't the woman he married. I wasn't the woman he belittled. I wasn't the woman he tried to discard. You were right about one thing, I said at last. I didn't fit into your world. Margaret smirked bitterly. Exactly. Because I finished. I was never meant to stand beside you. I was meant to stand above you. A collective gasp moved through the ballroom like a wave. But the moment wasn't finished yet. Because now it was time to reveal the final twist, the one no one in that room could have predicted. I reached into the small clutch hanging from my wrist and pulled out another envelope. This one sealed with a bold crimson wax stamp. What is that? Ethan whispered. Proof, I replied. That makes everything undeniably legal. Margaret scoffed. You're bluffing. Without another word. I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of heavy cardstock, the signed and notarized. Declaration of Asset Control Transfer. Authenticated by Ethan's most trusted attorney, who had switched sides once he realized Ethan was planning to divorce me without honoring the spousal protections. I held it up so everyone could see. "This document," I said calmly, "means that the moment the divorce is finalized, which you so generously initiated, I become the sole executor of every Dawson asset." Ethan choked out. "No. Claire, please, don't do this." "I didn't start this," I replied, "but I'm going to finish it." Margaret swayed slightly, gripping the chair behind her as though the weight of reality had finally crushed her. "You can't," she whispered. "You can't do this to us." And then I said the words that would be remembered long after that glittering night ended. "You did it to yourself." The ballroom erupted into chaos, half the guests whispering excitedly, half retreating from the Dawson family like walking away from a sinking ship. Someone pulled out a phone to record. Someone else whispered, "She owns everything." She actually owns everything. Ethan collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Margaret stumbled backward, her breath coming in shallow, furious gasps. But I stood still, calm, untouchable. For the first time in my life, I felt powerful. And then, just as I turned to leave, the lights in the ballroom flickered. A hush fell over the crowd. Margaret straightened slowly, a strange icy smile crawling onto her face. "You may own everything on paper," she whispered, staring at me with chilling intensity, "but you have no idea what kind of enemy you've just made." And that was the beginning of a war that would grow far darker than anything that had happened that night. A war that would force me to confront the truth about the Dawson family. The secrets buried beneath their empire, and the danger that came with owning everything they lost. Because Margaret Dawson wasn't done fighting. Not even close. And as I sat in the back of that gleaming black limousine watching the city lights smear against the wet glass like melting gold, I kept replaying the final words my mother-in-law had hurled at me before I walked out of her house she had called. Me ungrateful, clueless, undeserving, and yet there I was stepping into a destiny she never imagined. I could hold, and yet in that moment I felt something deeper than anger. It was a strange, gentle heaviness, the feeling you get when you know life is about to turn a violent corner, but you have no choice except to accelerate into it. And so I closed my eyes and let the memories unwind again. Because I knew that before I faced her for the last time, I needed to remember who I used to be and who I had finally become. The girl who once trembled before that family was gone. The woman rising now had learned too much, lost too much, and survived too much to hesitate anymore. Before today, I had prayed for their approval, but now I only wanted the truth to come out. And so as the limo curved around the long marble driveway of their mansion, again the same mansion where they had dismissed me, belittled me, thrown me out of dinners, spoken about me like I was invisible, I felt no fear, only a slow burning clarity. For the first time I could see with painful honesty the way they had always seen me, as an outsider, an inconvenience, a mistake their perfect son had made. And yet the irony was brutal, because the empire they worshipped, the fortune they built, their confidence, their status, their legacy, none of it truly belonged to them anymore, not after my grandfather had named me his sole heir, not after the documents were finalized, not after the attorneys confirmed every signature, every clause, and every transfer of power. That night, I stepped out of the limo wearing the same white dress I had worn the day they first rejected me. I wanted them to see the woman they had tried to break and failed. And as the rain fell softly around me, it felt like the sky itself was washing away the last traces of who I was before I stepped inside their golden palace again. The hallway glittered like a shrine to wealth, but all I could see were the cracks beneath the perfection, the unspoken tensions, the hidden debts of the heart. My husband stood at the far end of the hall, frozen halfway down the marble steps, his eyes wide, shoulders tight, the moment he saw me, and something in his face shifted between relief, fear, and shame. He whispered my name, but I did not stop, because now I carried the strength of truth and the weight of power. I walked past him without turning because tonight was not about him. This confrontation belonged to another woman, the one who had shaped him, raised him, poisoned him with expectations, and weaponized silence against me. His mother stood in the dining room, the same dining room where months ago she had publicly humiliated me at a dinner so cold I still remembered every word. She had said tonight she looked smaller somehow, or maybe it was just that I finally saw her clearly, not as a queen, but as a woman, consumed by her own insecurities, and as she lifted her chin to speak, I raised my hand slightly, and she stopped that. Alone shocked her. The girl she dismissed would never have interrupted her, but the woman before her now was done bowing. She demanded to know why I had returned, and I told her simply that the story was not finished, that she had spoken her part. And now I would speak mine, and the emotions that erupted inside me were not rage, but something older, deeper, the kind of strength that rises only after repeated heartbreak. I told her the truth about the will, the inheritance, the billions, the properties, the companies, the legacy she never imagined her son had married into. She stared at me, stunned, silent, blinking rapidly, as if reality were distorting in front of her. She asked if it was a joke, a trick, a mistake, but I only placed the documents on the long polished table, the same spot where she had once handed me divorce papers and told me I was nothing. The silence that followed was thick like smoke. I watched her pride collapse in slow motion, her face losing its hard edges, her voice trembling, as she tried to understand how the girl she had mocked could own the very empire she worshipped. She asked why my grandfather had chosen me, and I realized in that instant that all her cruelty had come from fear. Fear that her son had married someone beyond her control, fear that the world did not revolve around her anymore, fear that she would lose everything she had pretended to protect. And so I told her the truth. My grandfather chose me because he saw in me the resilience she tried to erase, because he saw strength where she saw weakness, purpose where she saw inconvenience, beauty where she saw threat. And as her eyes filled with panic, she reached for the papers with shaking hands, but I placed my fingers on them, stopping her gently. I did not want revenge. I only wanted respect, the respect she had never given me, the recognition she denied me, the dignity she ripped away from me on the night she mocked my worth. And as I looked at her, I felt something unexpected. I felt sorry for her, because power without love is a cage, and she had lived inside that cage all her life. Her son stood behind me, afraid to move, afraid to speak, afraid that the truth would expose him too, and I could feel his shame rising like heat from the floor. But this moment was not for him. This moment was mine. I told her calmly that I was not here to destroy them. I was here to show them that kindness could coexist with power, that compassion was not weakness, and that respect was the only currency that mattered in the end. When I finished speaking, she sat down slowly, her hands trembling against the carved chair, as if the weight of her own choices had finally settled on her shoulders. And for the first time in years, she said my name, not with anger, not with superiority, but with something closer to realization. She asked what I wanted, and the truth was simple. I wanted to end the war. I wanted to heal, but on equal ground. Not as a beggar, not as an outsider, not as a broken daughter-in-law, but as a woman strong enough to claim her space. And then everything shifted. Her son stepped forward, his eyes filled with tears, his voice cracking as he admitted his mistakes, the ways he let her control him, the ways he abandoned me emotionally, the ways he failed to stand beside me when I needed him. And though his apology cracked something inside me, I knew forgiveness would not come easily, but I listened because I had promised myself I would choose wisdom over bitterness tonight. Everything felt raw, honest, fragile, and I knew the next words could change the course of all our lives forever. And as the room thickened with the scent of rain-soaked air and unspoken truths, I felt the weight of every choice pressing against my chest. The truth my husband spoke was painful, not because it shocked me, but because it finally confirmed what I had always known, that the man who once swore to protect me had been too afraid to protect me from his own family. I watched him struggle to meet my eyes, the shame in his posture, the tremble in his voice. The regret that poured out of him like a confession from a wounded soul. He told me he had loved me more than anything, but fear of disappointing his mother had chained him into silence. He admitted he knew she was hurting me, knew she was belittling me, knew she was slowly killing the light inside me, and yet he said nothing, hoping the storms would die on their own, not realizing that silence is what strengthens storms. And I stood still, listening, not because I wanted to heal him, but because I needed to heal myself. And then he said the words that cracked the floor between us. He said he would rather lose his inheritance, his family, his home, than lose me again. And for a moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to step into that promise and hold it close, but promises spoken after damage are like fragile glass. They can cut deeper if held too tightly. So I told him gently that love without courage is only a performance, and I could no longer live inside performances. His face fell, but he nodded because deep down he knew it too. And when I turned to his mother, I saw something even stranger. Her eyes were no longer sharp with arrogance. They were soft, uncertain, almost desperate. She asked me what would happen to their empire now that it was legally mine. Would I evict them? Would I strip them of power? Would I let them drown in the consequences of their own cruelty? And for a moment, her fear tempted me. Revenge always whispers like a sweet poison, but then I remembered the girl I used to be, the one who begged for their acceptance, the one who cried alone, the one who tried to earn love from people who only valued control. And I realized something powerful I had already won, not by taking anything from them, but by becoming someone they could never break. And so I told her I would not take their home, their status, or their comfort. I would rebuild the empire with fairness, where no one would be treated the way I was treated, where no woman would be silenced, where kindness would not be mocked as weakness. Her eyes widened at the mercy in my voice, and for the first time she looked at me not as a threat, but as someone she could learn from. And then something happened I never expected. She whispered an apology, a real trembling apology from a woman who had never bowed to anyone, not even her own guilt. She said she was wrong. She said she feared losing her son so much that she lost her own humanity in the process. She said she thought controlling everything was the only way to protect her family, but she had become the biggest danger to it. Her voice cracked as she admitted she envied me, envied my courage, envied the strength I showed even when she pushed me to the edge. And then she said she wished she had known me before she built walls around her heart, walls she never let anyone climb, not even her own son. And in that moment I realized something profound. The strongest people are often the most broken under their armor, and maybe she had never learned how to be loved without controlling everything around her. I took a slow breath and told her I forgave her, not because she earned it, but because I refused to carry her darkness anymore. And as the words left my lips, something shifted in the room. The air softened, the heaviness lifted. The emotional battlefield became a quiet truth, and I saw her shoulders lower, as if she had been holding the entire world on her back for years. She stood, slowly walked up to me, and for the first time in all the years I had known her, she placed her hand on mine, not as a challenge, but as a mother reaching out to a daughter. Her eyes glistened, and she asked if we could start again on equal ground, not as enemies, not as rivals, but as women, rebuilding what pride once destroyed. And I nodded, gently, because sometimes life gives you endings disguised as beginnings. My husband stepped closer, asking if there was any hope left for us, but I told him something he needed to hear. I told him forgiveness was possible, but trust had to be rebuilt. Trust was not gifted. It was earned through action, not words. He nodded, determined, as if he understood that the path would be long, but he was ready to walk it, not because I was his wife, but because he wanted to be a better man for himself. And then I stepped back, inhaled deeply, letting the scent of rain and renewal fill my lungs. This house, once a battlefield of humiliation, now felt like a place where truth had finally entered through shattered pride and trembling apologies. And as I walked toward the grand doorway, the woman I once was dissolved behind me, replaced by someone stronger, lighter, freer. I turned one last time, looked at the family who once wounded me, and realized that sometimes power is not in revenge, power is in healing. without losing yourself, and when I stepped outside into the soft rain, I felt a strange warmth on my skin, as if the universe itself whispered that this chapter was complete, that I had risen from what was meant to shatter me, and that the next story of my life would begin not with pain, but with power, hope, and a heart finally free. And years later, when the world had reshaped itself around the choices I made, I often found myself standing on the balcony of my own penthouse, staring at the skyline that had once watched me break and then watched me rise stronger than ever. And in those moments, I realized that life had never intended to destroy me. It had only intended to teach me how to become the kind of woman who could rebuild herself even from ashes. I learned that pain is not the enemy, silence is not defeat, and love is not always enough to save someone who refuses to save themselves. And yet I held no bitterness in my heart, because every storm that once drowned me had also reshaped me into someone who could finally breathe above the waves. The empire I inherited grew not because of wealth, but because of compassion. The people who once feared me now trusted me, and the woman who tried to control me came to me for guidance and peace. She never became perfect, but she became human, and sometimes humanity is all we ever needed from each other. My husband changed too, not overnight, not magically, but through the slow, honest work of rebuilding a heart he had once shattered. He became a man who no longer hid behind his mother's shadow or his fears, and though our marriage did not return to what it once was, it evolved into something clearer, stronger, a bond built on truth, not expectations. And as for me, I discovered that the greatest victory was not owning an empire, but owning my voice, my choices, my heart, my destiny. I learned that healing is not a place you reach, it is a path you walk every day. Sometimes steady, sometimes trembling, but always forward. And whenever I looked back at the girl I once was standing outside their mansion in the rain, holding her breaking heart like a fragile secret, I wanted to tell her that she would rise, that she would not just survive, but transform into a woman whose story would inspire others to stand even when their knees shook, stand even when the world tried to silence them, stand until silence itself broke into respect. And as I leaned on the balcony railing, watching the night breathe across the city, like a living thing, I felt a peace inside me that no one could steal, because it had been earned, carved from heartbreak, shaped by truth, carried by courage. And I whispered softly to myself that no matter how many storms life sends, the woman I have become will always rise. And in the quiet glow of the city lights, I finally understood that every ending is simply the beginning of the person we were always meant to be.